Ray Chaudhry is a special advisor to the Sustainable Development Committee and is serving on the IC3 Advisory Committee. So, gratitude, lots of gratitude to you, Tio, and certainly to our panelists as well. And before I turn it over to you to introduce our panelists, I also just want to make a couple of quick announcements. And of course, this Thoughtful Thursdays is one of the regular events that's happening in the IC3 Live series of Thoughtful Thursdays webinars. And when IC3 Live was envisioned, the idea was to create an open access platform for resources and live virtual events that are completely free and open access to schools globally. And supporting that mission of counseling in every school is really why IC3 exists. So much gratitude to IC3 leadership committees, to everyone on this panel and contributing today. We've already seen engagement from more than 70 countries since the launch of IC3 Live on the 4th of June. And a couple of major events coming up at the end of this month. Our very first presidential panel, and of course that's a virtual presidential panel through IC3 Live on nurturing the next rung of leaders. And that's being led by Associate Vice Chancellor of UC Santa Cruz, Michelle Whittingham. And then the next day, we will be having the very first virtual fair and symposium event, which is expected to welcome about 10,000 students from IC3's network of host schools globally. And we're very proud about that as well. And inviting all of our colleagues at universities globally to register and participate and connect with those students who really are in need of your counseling and advising at this stage. So without further ado, Utio, I'm turning it over to you and really looking forward to the discussion. And thanks to all of the panelists. I know you're gonna take it off for the introductions. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Very warm welcome from sunny Denver in Colorado. And to all distinguished panelists, literally spanning the globe, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, from wherever you are joining us, either via Zoom, YouTube Live, or Facebook Live. We sincerely appreciate you taking the time to join us on this discussion. So the topic for this August day, the 6th, is educating for sustainability. IC3 also has had the Sustainable Development Committee, as Jim mentioned, and part of its leadership with representation from around the world as they sponsored this webinar. It is an honor to have all of you on this panel, to my distinguished panelists here. And we look forward to the Q&A, and I'll have the opportunity to hear the stories on sustainability, sustainable development. We would also like to make the connection today between the discipline of sustainability and the relevance to the careers, the future, and how all of this is in regard to our current world and the future of our world, and how we can promote the idea of motivating young minds who are about to graduate from high school and pursue higher education, the opportunity that is available to them within the field, their studies, and in their disciplines. So it goes without saying that we also wish to inspire them and have them embrace the notion of sustainability in every sphere as they join in the education, the advocacy, and in supporting the endeavors that would advance sustainable development. So I'll move on to my next slide and give a little background for folks joining in on the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals which are there. So these were adopted by the UN in 2015, and the 17 goals with about 169 targets are what the UN has committed to working towards through the year 2030, with the hope of creating a lasting positive change and freedom in the general areas of the people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. The Sustainable Development Goals are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They address the global challenges we face, including those related to poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. The 17 goals are all interconnected, and in order to leave no one behind, it is important that we achieve them all by 2030. while we're focused on global education, engagement, learning experiences, the idea really is how can we inspire to take action? The one that most people look at from the education world is looking at SDG 4, the fourth goal, which ensures inclusive and equitable sustainable development goal, especially with quality education and the promotion of lifelong learning by providing opportunities for all through partnerships, through policy guidelines, capacity development, monitoring, advocacy, and assessment. So if you look at those goals, goals 1 to 5, they are related and connected to humans. Goals 6 to 12 really talk about governance. Goals 13 to 15 are primarily environmental. Sustainable Goal 16 looks at peace and justice, and Goal 17 is talking about partnerships. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the role that UNESCO has played. And then on the top of your screen, you will see a link which we can also share out in a few. This is promoted lots of courses available on SDGs around the world. And if you go to the link through here, you'll be able to see lots of opportunities for you as a counselor and for others joining in to share with the students on courses, opportunities, educational programs that are there offered through universities around the world, and they're kind of broken down by goal, and some which span across too. So I'm here at the University of Denver right now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we are doing at the University of Denver to give a flavor of the kind of work that is happening in U.S. higher universities in the area of sustainability. And I know our esteemed panelists here from other universities will also be able to probably talk to it later on in the Q&A, or we could share out with the folks here opportunities that are there. So on the next slide, I have the role and the kind of work that the University of Denver has been doing in the area of sustainability. So you see in the last couple of years, we have about reduced 38% of our greenhouse gas emissions on campus. We have put in over, 8,000 people have participated in the Center for Sustainability programs just in the 2018-2019 year, from which we have the data. And this year, we believe, have been more than 12,000 people have been involved in that. We have reduced a lot of our electricity usage over the last 10-12 year period. And the two main capital projects that are coming up on campus, including a building that I would be probably, moving my office to in the next 5 to 6 months, is completely LEED certified, the platinum quality standard of building that we have been able to do, put up using sustainable materials, and also along with that, what we've been doing is promoting sustainable education. So on the next slide, I have some opportunities that people could look at. If you visit www.du.edu/sustainability, you will see we have a whole menu under that talking about the role of sustainability at the university, but also how we're developing solutions to shape lives, the programs you could get involved in, but also a lot of the research. I just give you a quick menu on the next slide of the kind of courses that are available for folks. Here, so we have got courses across the board in all our colleges. that students can participate in. I myself, my faculty appointment is in the Department of Geography and Environment, and we have lots of sustainability related programs there. Students can also take a minor in sustainability, and then of course they can do PhD programs and masters on there. So with that, let's turn it on, and it is my distinguished pleasure to actually introduce Ambika. Ambika is been quite involved with IC3 now. She's a serial entrepreneur and a diversity inclusion champion with over 19 years of experience advising global financial firms, namely GE Capital, American Express, XA, across emerging and developing markets in Asia, the US, and Europe. Since 2012, she has co-founded, scaled, and successfully exited 2 startups in the luxury lifestyle and digital services space. In 2018, Ambika took over career and college counseling innovation at the Delhi Public School, RK Puram. It's a preeminent CBSE school in New Delhi, India. In addition to supporting over 5,000 young learners explore career options and college choices, her focus has been to encourage entrepreneurship, critical thinking, social inclusion, writing skills to enable students to be more relevant and workforce ready. Ambika studied economics at Delhi University and has an MBA in marketing and finance from XLRI, Jamshedpur. With that, I turn it on to you, Ambika. And Ambika really is representative of many of you counselors on the panel, on listening in today, whether through YouTube Live, Facebook, or on Zoom. So please post your questions, and we are here to share our thoughts. Ambika, all yours.
Thank you, Util. And thank you, Ganesh, Jim, and Lucian for inviting me to share my 2 cents today. Good morning, good evening. I'm Ambika Kaul. I'm the college advisor and counselor at Delhi Public School, RK Puram. It's a preeminent national curriculum school in India. What I share today are my observations, which are built in 2 pillars: diversity and inclusion. Next slide, please. Our school is rare. In that, we have a very large intake of students in class 9 and class 11. It's via a competitive exam, and whoever wants to come and study in our rigorous academic and co-curricular environment takes this exam, goes through an interview. So just as an example, in grade 11 this year, we're taking over 400 students. Now, why is this important? Because 1, the kids are geographically diverse across South Asia, from Nepal to Bhutan, from the far reaches of the eastern states in India. My student body comes from tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 towns, tier 4 towns, and exceptional students who are from villages. Second, they represent all socioeconomic stratas. I have students who rock up to school in a Porsche, and there are others who walk the 5 kilometers, come rain or shine. Today, we will talk about my perspective, counseling for sustainability, some experiences that we've had, some others, and perhaps a minute or so on the NEP. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I'm an ex-investment banker and I'm an entrepreneur, and there were many skills I had to unlearn before I got to teach how to be substantive and transformational in sustainable engagement. This was crucial. Education for me is no longer literacy and numeracy. It is more about injecting them with fundamental values, sharing knowledge, giving them the skills, and then compelling them to action. It is surprising that despite our access to information, which is on our fingertips, the students were struggling with a lack of knowledge. And my constant conversations, and I'm sure it is true of all counselors, is what is your impact? How are you meaningful? Don't make it a tick mark. It is not about the college application. It is about your real life. The next piece that was also important was that while I don't have a Malala or a Greta level student, it is very inspiring to see what my kids are doing and what other students are doing in schools at the hyper-local, the regional and the national level. As counselors today, I'm focusing on three things. So you'll have to follow a three-pronged approach. One, what is your intent and the objective for the student? Is it to promote a sustainable world, inclusiveness? Is it justice-driven? What are the means? How are you going to do it? And then, holding on to the Gandhian philosophy of nonviolence, and also because high schoolers tend to be very passionate and very quick to react, what are the consequences of your actions? In the next slide, I'll be sharing with you two, so that was all sort of high level. Now let's get down to a tactical level, because you'll say, okay, Ambika, what does that mean in a counselor's room? Point number one, how do you have those conversations with an individual student that triggers empathy, that triggers that issue identification? What is that aspect of sustainability that is affecting them? How do they internalize that gap? And how do you move them to action? All of that is fairly student-specific. What is not student-specific is what we as counselors can do repeatedly as educators. One, focus on the facts. Your opinions are formed from those facts. Learn how to analyze that data, the critical thinking that comes in. I constantly say, do not give in to the shallow reactions of today's social media. This whole like and dislike. Like I tell the kids, we all speak languages which are rooted in deep and rich Latin or Sanskrit, and words have power. So we should learn to use them. Two quick examples within the context of sustainability. Cultural diversity and tolerance are more powerful as words than a heading, all them peeps, ma'am, or it's very cool, ma'am. So it's very important that when you're engaging with them, you're taking their context and you're showing them that there is a bigger context within which everything needs to be understood. Next slide, please. I am data obsessed, and so no presentation can be complete without my sharing all of this. I feel there are a few things that we will face as educators and leaders which are linked to the broad spectrum of sustainability. One, there are deep and sweeping changes across the world. And very often these are without leaders, from Occupy Wall Street to the Me Too movement to the very recent student protests against the Citizenship Act in India and in Hong Kong. The political narrative has been polarizing. The COVID pandemic is there. So there is an aftermath that's going to follow. So media literacy is critical. And as a non-subject teacher, a counselor plays a very important role in how you start those conversations. The second point, and it is amazing to me how this humble hashtag has allowed the youth to engage with elected officials. It has brought visibility, it has brought participation to civic issues, and it has allowed for ideas to replicate across geographic boundaries. So again, inclusive communication. What I'm putting out there needs to be sensitive to the needs and the sensitivities of other cultures. And as every coin has two sides, sorry, sometimes I switch, the problem of being multilingual, sometimes I switch into Hindi in my head. So that was a humble brag, 2 languages, people. Okay, so you can see that when you're talking to somebody who's working with students, there is a levity about how you discuss even serious issues. Now back to the other 2 points. The questions we need to keep on asking and encourage them to ask. 1, are you inclusive? Technology is amazing. Look at the panel up there. I'm speaking to my friends in Denver and Pennsylvania and the West Coast and Bombay and me here in New Delhi. But it also brings in new exclusions. And sustainability is about also being inclusive. So how are we being sensitive to that? It is to do with digital exclusion, and there is a wallet involved in it. The other aspect is that we all form opinions by what we read, by what we think, by what we hear and watch. So we should be conscious that our opinions are being formed by facts and analysis and not by an algorithm. In my next slide, and this is what I was asked to share, here are some experiences that my students have worked on and a couple of my friends have, their kids have worked on, and by kids I mean the students, over the last year or so. My student Sagnik created Augura. It is an app that uses AI and GIS to predict floods based on river data of the previous year. Just to make it simple, he took this app and he tested it on the Brahmini and the Baitri rivers This is in Odisha, in the eastern part of India, which is prone to devastating floods. His AI worked so well that it was able to predict a flood which would have life and property loss 4 days in advance. So the trigger was raised, the flag was raised. This is a 17-year-old, 18-year-old. For this, Sagnik was presented with India's highest civilian honor by both President Kovind as well as my Prime Minister Modi for an excellence in the field of innovation. From that, let's talk about e-waste, something very relevant with the number of gadgets we have in front of us. And I'm sure we're changing them regularly. My friend Shikha at Step by Step told me about Shivraj. He's an economics and a business enthusiast who was very concerned about the quantity of e-waste that we created. So he started erasewaste.in. It's an initiative that first created awareness and then helped you dispose of and safely recycle your gadgets and devices. More importantly, he also took care of cables, switches, and appliances. That's your first point. Now, when you're a counselor in New Delhi and a child comes up to you and says, "Ma'am, I'm passionate about animal rights." Honestly, you expect an Instagram page with cute little puppies that says, "Adopt me." Now, that is my bias showing. What you don't expect is snakes. So my student Shreyas, he's from a mining town in Dhanbad, Jharkhand. He almost stepped on a snake while he was walking to school. That area is filled with them. This was his previous school, not RKP. Curious by nature, he learned that the majority of snakes were not venomous. He understood the concepts of false bites. He understood that snakes have an important religious as well as a mythical background in the area where he lived. He felt very strongly that the reptiles also deserved a space. And so he worked with an NGO. He created awareness. He educated the locals. He taught multiple villages to live in harmony with nature. And these are his words when we were discussing it. He's like, "Man, they're just like Californians. Snakes come out to suntan at midday, and then they want to go home to nap. So you just have to give them that space." And now from snakes to lakes, let me share a story which my friends Geeta and Sameer from Legacy School in Bangalore have shared with me. And it's really inspirational. Bangalore lakes are notorious for being polluted. And frankly, they're just nasty. In 2014, under the guidance of Bindu, one of the teachers, a group of students started cleaning the lake, bits and pots, then started planting herb gardens, then planted a vertical bamboo garden. They measured the quality of water for their science project. In 2016, they started a 5 to 10 kilometer community bicycle ride. It happens in every August, where they pedal for safe and clean green city. They're showing their commitment to community development, to progressive energy policies and sustainable development. This is not an independent student, there are multiple students here. Legacy School is also collaborating with the UN on various initiatives, and their curriculum teaches global perspective from primary school to engage with students on sustainability. My last one, I promise, because I'm conscious of time. Let's talk a little political. I have a student, Kabir. He is adorable, but also one of those. So my school is Nerdsville, for those who know it. And so he was very disturbed by the increasing polarization in news and politics. He firmly believed that it stemmed from something called a filter bubble, a situation where we are choosing to consume content that reinforces our beliefs. So he created Unslant. It's a browser extension. It uses your natural language programming. It analyzes what you're reading, and it finds you high quality counterpoint narratives. So now we as readers can have a broader, more balanced view. These examples are endless, as is their energy. And you might say, Ambika, these are exceptional children. Yes, they are exceptional and they are bright. But honestly, exceptionalism comes from consistent thought and action towards something that you feel strongly about. And it is now our challenge to inspire them and to harness this. Next slide. It was very opportune and very thoughtful of the Indian government to release its new education policy last week, just in time for me to include it today in Thoughtful Thursday. I'd like to spend about 30 seconds on it with you, and then I'm done. This is India's current position from the India UN website. What is important is to note the right side. We have 423 million youth. We also have a 25.8% gross enrollment in higher education. We have a mid-20s enrollment in senior secondary as well. Next slide, please. While one can spend an hour or two on the NEP, what is amazing is the vision of this policy. It ensures inclusiveness and access to education, from pre-primary through high school into graduate education. It looks to transform pedagogy, curriculum, policies, infrastructures. Governance is going to be simplified. The focus is going to be on broader skill-based learning. And the idea is to push gross enrollment ratio from the mid-20s into, I think, a perfect 100 at the school level and about 50% at the college level. It also highlights the need for counselors, people like you and me, and that was much needed. I'm very excited about what this means. Policy has just come out. We're still interpreting and understanding the implications. The rollout is the next decade or so. But we're looking to harness the power of 420 million youth if population stays the way it is right now. And that is a lot of energy. And it is up to people like you and me to come together and talk about global imperatives and make sure that we are actually making a more livable, just world. That's all from me. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Ambika. Thank you very much. It's my distinct pleasure now to welcome our next panelist here. Eddie West is the Assistant Dean of International Strategy and Programs at San Diego State University's Global Campus, where he provides leadership and international partnership development and collaborations. From 2016 to 2019, Eddie served as the Assistant Dean for International Programs at Berkeley Extension, the Continuing and Professional Education Division of UC Berkeley. And previously, before that, he led international initiatives at the National Association for College Admission Counseling. West is also a founding member of Keny, the Climate Action Network for International Educators, a grassroots initiative formed by international education practitioners from around the world who see the need and the opportunity for students and working professionals alike to step up and act on climate. Eddie, welcome. Thank you for joining the panel. And if you don't mind sharing some of your thoughts and the work you're doing at Keny. All yours, Eddie.
Thank you so much, Utio, and thank you to my fellow panelists and to all the attendees who are here today. It's such a pleasure to be a part of such an important conversation. Just briefly, I'd like to introduce my interest in the topic at hand and how I came to it. I started in the field of international education about 20 years ago. And way back when, I was working for another California-based university. And around that time, I guess this was, maybe early 2000s, is when I started taking a real interest in sustainability issues and climate change in general. And, I was much younger in my career, much more inexperienced, and therefore much more naive. I still feel naive at times, but much more so back then. And I remember talking to a much more senior colleague of mine in the field. And the field, when I say the field, I'm talking very specifically about international student mobility, because that's what I've spent most of my career on, bringing students from country A to country B, whether it be outbound study abroad by students, incoming studies by international students coming to the US. And I was chatting with this senior colleague who I had a great deal of respect for. And I said, Randy was his name. I said, Randy, isn't it great that we don't work in one of these polluting fields like oil and gas or, now fracking or, something of that sort, mining. And I remember distinctly, I'll never forget it. Randy kind of looked at me and said, actually, Eddie, our field is not completely clean and green. Think about all of the emissions that are involved when students and us as practitioners get on planes and go globetrotting around the world. That gives off CO2, that has very tangible material climate impacts. And it was one of those moments, it was a learning moment for me, because I was like, what we'd say in the US, duh, I don't know why I didn't realize that. And it always kind of gnawed at me because honestly, it was an acknowledgement that there's a problem when all of us use transportation that are emitters of CO2, but didn't know what could be done about it. Now, fast forward to today. Now I'm at another California-based university, San Diego State University, and I'll talk a little bit about that maybe later, time allowing. But what I'd really like to share now, if we could go to the next slide, please, is the work that Utio mentioned by a group called Keny. And I'm a member of Keny. Keny is open access, grassroots, as we mentioned. And what it is it's an attempt, much like IC3 Sustainability Committee, to bring people who are either passionate or even just merely curious and want to learn more about the intersection of international education, international student mobility, and climate. And Keny started by really only about a year ago. It's very nascent, I guess you'd call it, as an organization. But our mission, so to speak, is really just to get more attention and to get venues established where like-minded kindred spirits can network, learn, join alliances, and actually take action, as the A in Keny's name indicates. And if we go to the next slide, and I'll just wrap up here with this next slide and then turn it over to some of my other colleagues. But what we've done so far, Keny, is we just held in May a series of action summits, online, of course. I'm pleased to say we had these in the planning stages before COVID reared its ugly head. So we were fortunate in that respect because we thought, okay, well now everyone will be home and they can access this summit opportunity very freely like we are today. Anyhow, we had two separate summits. One was geared toward folks in the US and in Latin America. And then the other was geared toward folks in Asia Pacific more generally. And we essentially brought together a number of experts and practitioners who could speak, again, with certain authority on the various topics that you'll see listed in those two program screenshots. And I won't go over in any great detail, except to say that really, we are thrilled that IC3 and Utio and colleagues have convened this discussion today, and thrilled to know that there's a sustainability impetus and effort underway in IC3, because I think the network is so important and so much work is needed and so much good work can be done. And the last thing I'll just wrap up with quickly is to say, I feel like it's incumbent upon us, at the risk of getting on a soapbox here, because we have the power, because we have the awareness, to come up with creative solutions. And indeed, as Ambika was saying, instill in our young students, kindle that fire and help them when they have that inclination to take action, and guide them along the way. So with that, I'll wrap up and look forward to Q&A later. But thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Eddie. I request all folks who are, tuning in live on Zoom, YouTube, or Facebook to share your questions, and we will surely get to them soon. My next panelist is my former colleague, and Dr. Nima Kudva is the Associate Dean of the Faculty at Cornell University. She serves as faculty affiliate of the South Asia program, and she's also a fellow of the Atkinson Center for Sustainable Future, and as a field member for Public Affairs, Global Development, South Asian Studies, and Visual Studies. Nima's research focuses on small cities and their regions, and on institutional structures for equitable planning and development. She has explored various aspects of these issues, primarily in South Asia, but also in the US and across the world with her students. She's involved in pedagogical experiments around citizenship and sustainability planning as faculty lead for the Nimgiris Field Learning Center in Coexistence, a transdisciplinary engaged collaboration with the Keystone Foundation in India. And Nima is going to share some of her thoughts and insights. Nima, welcome.
Thank you, Theo, and thank you to IC3 for doing this important work. I can't, it's been a pleasure to listen to Ambika and to Eddie, and and I'm looking forward to hearing Sudipta as well. And so, lots of big words there: transdisciplinary, engaged, collaboration. So what I'm going to try and do here is walk you through very quickly a little bit of this program that we tried, we're still in the process of putting together. We've been running it for about a decade now. And to speak a little bit about where I am, Cornell, and how we think about sustainability, right? And how we want to be able to think about sustainability. And so Cornell is, of course, fairly well-known university, started over 150 years ago, is tucked away in upstate New York, very far from New York City. We have students who land up here thinking they're going to land up in the city, which is kind of amusing to all of us. But it's a university with about 24,000 students, about 14,000 of whom are undergraduates, and we have about 1,700 faculty, and who work. And we are the land grant, which is an American word for universities that have a public mission, funded by the state. So we have offices in every one of New York State's counties, which is like the district in India. And we have about 8,000 staff. So Cornell itself is like one of the small cities I study. The size of Cornell is the size of Kotagiri. So it's an incredibly interesting place to be in, and has been a leader in the field of sustainability for a very long time. It was quite a radical institution in its making. We were always open to all people for every avenue of study. So we have everything from a vet school to a med school to you want to study philosophy, arts, dance, my field, architecture and planning. So in terms of sustainability, we use our plant and our region and the places that we work in over 70 countries. We use that as the ground on which we experiment to open up questions of how we will deal with the future, the questions that Eddie brought up, right? And we work with our students in the ways in which Ambika talked about, which is to really think about education not just as being a credentialing or a degree, but to really think about it as opening up the question of how do you become an innovative and thoughtful thinker and doer and practitioner who's going to be, truly invested in questions of equity, right, on all fronts. And so if you look at Cornell, you can go to Sustainability Facts at Cornell. That's a website that we have, and it'll trot out a litany of numbers and things about our greenhouse gas emissions, the fact that we've held our energy use for the last 20 years, haven't gone up, that we manufacture so much of our own energy. We have massive solar farms. You'll get all of that information from there. I think the important piece to realize is that amongst the IVs, we tend to be the ones who push the sustainability question quite intensely. And it comes out of our land grant mission in part, and in part, of course, from everything else that we do. So 20% of the courses Cornell offers, about 4,000 every semester, right, are focused on some aspect of sustainability. And from amongst my colleagues, I can safely say that there are about 500 of us who are invested either through our scholarship or our pedagogical concerns in issues of sustainability. And so, there's all sorts of experiments that are happening at any given point at Cornell, right? So whether it's earth source heating, geothermal heating, or lake source cooling, you can just sort of look at every aspect and you'll find some sort of work that's being done. So I'm one of those 500 faculty who's deeply invested in this question of sustainability. I'm an architect trained in India, in Ahmedabad, and a planner trained at Berkeley, Eddie's old institution. And so, and I've worked in India, I've worked here in the US, I've worked in other parts of the world. But my work at Cornell is quite invested in, one part of it is invested in both creating and sustaining this collaboration. Please. And that should have been the slide that you were looking at the whole time I was talking, because it is so beautiful, as opposed to my mug. But here's the Nilgiris. Many of you would have been there, I hope, and you'll see there on the slides on the very top. It just sort of shows the Western Ghats and the importance of the Western Ghats to all of India's climate. Our water. So, hundreds of millions of, I can go on, I won't, but what is actually really important about the Western Ghats place under great development. It's a part of India that has various other groups. And so, it's where our elephants and our tigers
Sorry, folks, I don't know. The technology world we are living in sometimes, doesn't hold up as sustainably as we hope it to be. We will get Nima back in a sec and then continue with that. But in the meantime, in the interest of time for all those listening, maybe we'll move on. And it's a distinct pleasure to get reconnected with Sudipto Mukherjee. Sudipto has been someone I have not been in active touch with over almost 3 decades, but it's a pleasure to welcome him again today. Sudipto Mukherjee is with the United Nations Development Program in the Bangladesh country office. He's an architect and town planner with more than 2 decades of experience in international development. Sudipto is a joint recipient of the International Society of City and Regional Planners, ISOCARP Netherlands, and the IKEA Foundation sponsored International Urban Ecology Award. He has previously worked with the Government of India from 1992 to 1997. He worked with the UK Department for International Development from 1998 to March 2005 as the Infrastructure and Urban Advisor, and with the UN Habitat from 2005 to 2009 as the head of country office. Mr. Mukherjee joined UNDP in September 2009 in the Iraq country office and has since worked as country director at Sierra Leone from 2013 to 2016, and thereafter in Bangladesh from 2016 to 2018. Since 2019 January, he has assumed the responsibilities of UNDP resident rep for Bangladesh. He carries a diverse crisis management experience, having worked in Iraq on the area of conflict, in Sierra Leone with the Ebola pandemic, and in Bangladesh now with the transboundary Rohingya influx. He's presently the UN COVID-19 coordinator for Bangladesh. Sudipto, it's a pleasure to welcome you, and I turn it over to you to share your thoughts on this important topic. And we see Nima is back, and after Sudipto, we'll come back because we really want to hear about the work that Nima has done in Coexistence that I am absolutely fascinated by. So Sudipto, all yours, and then we'll come back to you, Nima, in a sec.
Thanks very much, Utyo, and it's a pleasure getting back in touch with you after actually 3 decades. We were in the School of Planning and Architecture together at the same time. He was much my junior. He looks exactly the same. I believe he must be still as mischievous as he used to be in those days. But he is a senior man now. I am an architect, but I have not been practicing architecture or planning for most of my sort of, at least last 10, 15 years. And all I do is to manage people and read and write emails. That's how I would describe myself. What I was planning to do today is that I'm not an academic. I'm more of a practitioner, but in the last, say, 2, 3, 4 years, ever since 2015, September, when the world signed up to Sustainable Development Goals, UNDP has been in the lead, and I, as the country head, have been in the lead in trying to get everybody coalesced around the Sustainable Development Goals. And it is in that context that I actually started doing a little bit of research about sustainable development in general and what Mahatma Gandhi had to do about sustainable development almost 100 years ago. So my presentation today is about Gandhi, actually, and whether we still have an enduring relevance of the Mahatma 150 years later. As almost 100 years ago that he actually did speak about sustainable development. Next slide, please. First some realities, air and water not free. We pay a price for others consumpting living. Today, I've been spending money in actually buying air purifiers, not just for myself at home, but even for the office. Delhi is one of the most polluted cities in the world, so is Dhaka for that matter. Our lives are much more connected. And most of our problems, if I talk about climate change, about global terrorism, we talk about currently ongoing pandemic, COVID-19, these are problems without passports. And finally, there can be no development without peace, and no peace without justice and respect for human rights. And it is within that reality that the Agenda 2030 with 17 Sustainable Development Goals are crafted. But if we go to the next slide, let's look at how are the Sustainable Development Goals actually different, because most of your career counselors and actually able to speak with young people, they're different from all previous development agendas, because this is no longer a differentiate between northern and southern countries. This is a universal agenda. It talks about every 193 member states in the planet. It is perhaps the most inclusive agenda ever before, because it speaks about leaving no one behind. It focuses on quality. And I still remember when we had the Sustainable Development Goals, before we prepared it, we've actually got people to come together to start formulating the goals. There was a major survey, about 1.5 billion participants in that survey, a survey called The World We Want. And people still mentioned the same areas that they wanted improvement on, but they wanted education, but they wanted quality education. So the focus on quality came there. Responsibilities for once go beyond national boundaries, because you're no longer a citizen of India or the US or Bangladesh or wherever, Canada. You are a citizen of the planet. And then for the first time ever, we have new goals that address drivers of conflict. And of course, the focus on sustainability. Now here comes Mr. Gandhi. Next slide, please. Gandhi spoke about Sarvodaya, welfare of all, but using the concept of Antodaya, which means starting with the last one first. And if you look at the progress of a society, he said that it should be determined by the state of the most vulnerable, the weakest ones first. If they are in good condition, then everybody is good. The litmus test of any policy is how it affects the most vulnerable. And the true wealth of any community is the well-being of all its members. And if you really look at education, and I'm particularly mentioning education because education for sustainability is something that people talk about, not many are familiar with a particular indicator in education, goal 4 people mentioned, which is goal 4.7, which actually, and I'm going to read out here, it's education for sustainable development and global citizenship is what we are speaking about, that by 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So all of you teachers, all of you counselors, go into goal 4 and look at indicator 4.7. Next slide, please. You know, he said that what we do today is our future. He said, let's not look at our natural resources, water, air, land as inheritance that we've received from our forefathers, but as loans that we've taken from our next generation. In fact, I started by saying that air and water is no longer free. This is exactly the issue that he spoke about 100 years ago. And he mentioned that the world is enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. Very simply said, live simply so that others can simply live. And poverty is not just lack of income and assets, it's a lack of access to basic services. And he said that poverty is the greatest form of violence that you can have in this world, because if you're poor, you're more likely to be denied of every other things, including fresh air, clean water, clean sanitation, etc. And the obsession with GDP, and I'm saying this particularly because this is in 2020 with COVID-19, most of the world has gone through major GDP contraction. The obsession with GDP has come at a very high cost to human development. And so economies continue to be designed to be production oriented rather than sort of looking at employment being generated, about looking at more equitable distribution of wealth. And so we have goal 8, which is on jobs, decent jobs and economic growth, and goal 10, which is on reduced inequalities. I think this reduced inequalities is something that we never had before, because again, if you look at South Asia particularly, if you look at Gini coefficient, is actually, while GDP growth rate has been consistently going up, particularly in Bangladesh, where this is increasingly a worry, that you have very impressive growth rates, but the gap between the rich and the poor are growing bigger and bigger. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, he mentioned about 2 particular things about health as being one's biggest wealth, and not gold and silver. Focus on your health. And this is something that we are particularly noticing in COVID-19. You know, people who are dying are people not because they're dying of COVID-19, they're invariably because they have some underlying health conditions. Their immunity is compromised, they have a weak heart, they have a weak kidney, they have a weak lung. And that's what is making them actually much more vulnerable to the disease. And education is not limited to literacy, but is something which is a lifetime phenomenon. And again, I bring it back to the educational values, again, back to goal target 4.7 in goal 4. And next slide, please. Can we have the next slide, please? Anyway, let me sort of, the next slide is the fact that, you know, for the first time ever in the whole history of development agendas, we actually are looking at not just supply side, but looking at the demand side. We have a goal on responsible consumption, goal 12. And the world we have created is a world of waste and imbalance. Let me read out some figures for you. 800 million people go hungry each night. 2 billion people suffer from obesity. While scarcity and shortages plague some places, waste is prevalent. 30% of electricity produced across the globe is wasted. 40% of food that is produced across the world is wasted. 50% of transportation capacity is wasted. And every dollar of GDP that we produces more than $1 in unaccounted pollution, waste, health risks, and loss of nature. And this is where Gandhi actually practiced, he was the epitome of personal practice of sustainable consumption and production. And he underscored the fact that the sustainability for the world, individual responsibility is extremely important, which is in the case of the SDGs, for the first time after 100 years, we're really looking at sustainable consumption. And he mentions, I mean, his famous saying that be the change that we wish to see in this world. He wanted human beings themselves to be the major change drivers in the process. And this is something which is actually embedded in the SDGs theory of change. I want to put this slide particularly on focus on gender equality, which one has to take one single indicator. It's not there in the SDGs, but I think it's a wonderful indicator that Gandhi had mentioned, that the day we will be able to say that our women are safe on the street at night, that is the day we would have achieved gender equality. It's an amazing indicator. I don't think, particularly in South Asia, Delhi, those who come from Delhi would tell you that this is an aspiration which will probably, we will not be able to achieve for the next maybe 10, 20, 30 years. Next slide, please. On goals, on particular peace, justice, and strong institutions, he focused on non-violence, peaceful coexistence, and he said that you must tolerate others' thoughts if you really believe that your thoughts are better than others. And I think that is something that, in fact, of late, I've been thinking that even tolerance is probably a very limiting word. Probably we need to expand it and say that tolerance comes with an element of just about tolerating. Perhaps we have to be much more accepting that this is a diverse world, and therefore we have to respect diversity much more just about tolerating diversity. Right now, as we speak, and I read it somewhere, that out of 193 nations, only 10 have no conflict of some sort. And so if you go by the list of violent conflicts, nations, this list is actually growing, and 10 might actually even narrow down to even lower numbers, because with the COVID-19 crisis, we see increase in domestic violence, we see intimate partner violence, we look at a lot of social unrest which is happening across the world, and this is going to only get worse. And I think it is in this context that the well-known Gandhian prescription of simple living attempts to both curb the human overreaching and greed, and to prevent the mindless exploitation and control over nature. And finally, if I were to leave you with a few thoughts, I should mention that, in fact, let's go to the next slide, please. That if there were three key teachings from the Mahatma, and I mentioned the decade of action because we just have less than 10 years left to achieve the Agenda 2030. And I must mention here that with the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of requests from many member states whether we should actually revisit the deadline of 2030. But the United Nations Secretary General actually said that all the more the SDGs have become important, and therefore there's no question of pushing the deadline. And if we have to achieve the SDGs in the decade of action, we have to act. We're already, we should have started yesterday. Three things that I would like to underline. One is much more responsible consumption and adopting a simple life. Second is celebrating diversity, not just tolerance, and then embracing non-violence. I think this is completely very, very important in a connected world. And I mentioned this because if but Utyo mentioned in the introduction that, in Bangladesh currently we are actually home to 1 million Rohingyas cooped up in what is possibly the world's single largest slum in Cox's Bazar. And they are not a Bangladesh's creation. There was injustice in next door Myanmar, and it is Bangladesh which is having to take care of this problem. So there are spillover problems, and we can only achieve a more peaceful world if the whole world comes together. So if there was one term that I would appeal to all of you, as you go and speak to everybody, to all of your students, is to remind everybody that we are global citizens that need to come together for a much more peaceful and prosperous and healthy planet. Thank you very much.
Looking at the time, thank you, Sudhituda. I'm going to actually turn it over with the first question actually to Nima and give Nima a chance to actually share the rest of her presentation thoughts. But in answering this question, in the work that Nima you've been doing in the Nimgiris, what do you think our students and our counselors could take away from in how they would be able to engage? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Sorry about dropping out earlier. Thank you, Theo. I was looking at, is that Lisa Meritz's question you were looking at?
Yeah.
And so, what can we do as universities? And so I told you a little bit about Cornell, but I think it's about thinking about the question of collaboration, right? And thinking about how we at the university, which is such an enclosed bubble world of its own, how we really begin to engage with the world and the communities that we will return to, right? And so the Nimgiris, the Field Learning Center, which we call the NFLC, was really, it's an experiment with that. It's an experiment with taking the university out of combining the expertise that is sort of cultivated in this hothouse atmosphere of the university with real life practice, right? That people like Shudipto, that NGOs, that all of us in our life experience, how do we bring those worlds together? So Cornell's collaboration in the NFLC is with the Keystone Foundation, which is in India, which started its work in the Nimgiris district in Tamil Nadu with the honey hunters of there's a particular Adivasi community which does honey hunting. And they started there in the early 1990s and they slowly grew. And so I have that image there that shows you all the different organizations that they've spawned, sort of created from this one central place. The next slide. And so the idea, and this goes back to both Lisa's question and to Uttio's question, is what were we trying to do? We're trying to bring together young, very bright people from the Adivasi communities, the future leaders, right? So Keystone works with about 12 different communities. And so we want to bring together young people from those communities with our young people at Cornell. And so our students come from, they're from all over the world, including from across the United States. And so we take a group of our undergraduates who are from all disciplines, and we bring them together with people in the Nimgiris, young people in the Nimgiris. It's a bilingual program. It's in Tamil and in English. And it brings together also not just Cornell faculty expertise across multiple fields. So the Cornell faculty from ecology, from conservation sciences, from anthropology. I'm from architecture and planning. And so we have a whole group of Cornell faculty. We also have our NGO partners. And so the idea is to bring this, which is why we use the language of transdisciplinary, right? We bring everyone together. Next slide, please. Using the Nimgiris, this UN-declared global biosphere, the first of its kind in the 1980s, using the biosphere, the work that we do, our bodies, ourselves, our experience, as the ground on which to really push this educational model forward. To understand, I think, Shudipta put it so well, right? That if we have to be able to do all this, that it involves our experience, our choices, our actions, but also working in community with values, with intent, deliberately. Next slide, please. So what does this program do? And Lisa, this is to you directly, right? We bring together equal numbers of students, small numbers of students. We've designed a program, like I said, it's taught sequentially. So for every sentence I speak in English, there is a sentence that's spoken in Tamil. Our Adivasi students could be dropouts from class 2. They could have done some amount of college, but you can imagine what kind of college this is. And so we don't have elite Indian kids. And so that's an interesting sort of dynamic because the community asked for it. The community asked us to to work only with their young people. And so that's what we do. So we work around community expressed needs, not our desire of what we think is what is required, right? So we worked for 3 years to really understand community desired needs and then fashion our program around it. The students train in the US for 15 weeks or in India, our Adivasi students with our NGO counterpart, and they train and they then come together for 1 semester in Kotagiri. They live together, they eat together, they work together. They spend 7 weeks first studying the place, studying themselves, trying to make those relationships between self and community, self and environment, community and environment. And so the first row of images that you see really walk you through some of our students. That's Kotagiri there. It's the canteen building where we have chai 3 times a day and talk. It's the classroom that we work in, and then the outside of the classroom, which is painted by the communities that Keystone works with. The second row of slides there really begins to indicate the biosphere, what I talked about earlier as the NFLC classroom, right? So there's a lot of work that is done in the space of the biosphere, much like what Ambika was talking about in terms of where her students go and try to work. But these are the spaces that for our Adivasi students, our community students, our Keystone students, we use different terminologies. These are the spaces they know, and these are the spaces where our Cornell students are completely alien. And so it's an interesting kind of displacement of power that begins to take place. And in the third slide, you'll begin to see that we also teach a whole lot of different kinds of research methods, participatory engagement, participatory research methods to really start to do the work. The work is always done with pairs of students. So it's the Cornell student with the community student, and we have translators who are embedded within the work. Next slide, please. There is a lot of engagement with community, right? So we always present back to the community. And of course, the district administration is involved. They've been involved with the work that we've been doing for a long time and so on. So the idea here, if I may just encapsulate everything, is the core of the NFLC principles is to work against binaries, and it's to work against power. And it's to work against the ways in which power is encapsulated in the world, in our language, in our being, in ourselves, in all of those pieces, right? And so we work across multiple binaries. And if you're interested, this article came out in the Indian journal, Current Conservation, and it is accompanied in the online version of the journal by 8 student research briefs. So the research briefs is the ways in which the research projects, the ways in which we work with our students. So we have 4 ongoing streams of research, which again came out of the Community Expressed Needs Survey. And we don't lionize the individual student. What we're really talking about is how do these 4 research streams work? And the 4 streams are environmental conservation, governance, health and well-being, and water and waste infrastructure, urbanization questions, right? And so, so within these, there are multiple projects. If you go to the NFLC website, you'll see more detail on that. But I just want to end by saying, and this is in line, I think, with a lot of what all our panelists have been talking about today, is that an education for sustainability, keeping sustainability and an equitable future in mind, has to be about creating people who can think and understand that research and practice is integral to the art of actually and the craft of living well, of living sustainably, of living simply, of living equitably in the future, right? And so the first binary that we're working against is this kind of, creating of categories of research, practice, and education. So we're trying to get our students to understand that in the positions of leadership that they will be in their home communities, they have to work across these binaries. So our projects and our curriculum is designed to do that. That's one of the most important sort of binaries that we work against. The other important binaries are about disciplinarity. We really work in interdisciplinary ways. Our projects are, again, our pedagogical and research projects are built in those ways. We are very deliberate about how we think about both the scientific method and traditional ecological knowledge. Again, bringing those 2 together in beginning to understand these 4 streams that I laid out earlier. For us, the rural and the urban are a false binary. The two are in a deep relationship with each other, as I think pandemic India has proven so poignantly and terribly, but it's true across all of the world. So we work against that. And in my own work in small cities, this point is really highlighted, right? Then we go back to what Shudipto was talking about, which is that the health of the body is the health of the community, and it is the health of the environment. The three are not distinguishable. We cannot think about the environment without thinking about people and vice versa. None of this exists in isolation. And so how do we then really begin to inculcate a sense of both responsibility, ethics, and an education that gets to this question? I'm going to end by talking about sort of diversity as being something so vast. When we start to think about sustainability, it's not just about insects and tigers and elephants and snakes and everybody. It's about people, it's about cultural diversity, it's about the languages we speak, it's about the caste questions, it's about who we put down and who we don't. It's not just gender equality, I think, in India. I mean, to hear the kinds of stories one is reading about now makes me want to cry. Right? I do cry every day when I read about the way, anyway, I'm not going to go there. And all of you on the call, I'm sure, are also with me on this. And so this question of diversity, I think, is really an important one, because people are in it just as animals and all living things, right? And so that's that last binary that we very consciously work against. So Lisa, I hope I've answered your question a little bit about how one university program, mine, the NFLC, does this kind of work. Everybody who's a part of this program for us is funded through tuition, and that Cornell tuition is provided, that works to sort of keep our Adivasi students in the program with us. And I'll end there. I've gone on for too long, I think, but this is my passion, my work. I do this day in and day out, as Uthio knows. He helped support us for a while. And so I'll stop there. But Uthio, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. This has been a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much, Nima. We're going to take a quick question from Anjali Anand Seth to everyone, saying, in a world that is consumer-driven and has a feeling of entitlement, what is that one important skill value that counselors or schools can teach the younger generation of today to ensure that the importance of sustainability is understood? Sudipta, you want to take a crack at that, and then maybe Ambika, you can share the counselor perspective.
Thanks very much. When I was growing up, this was way back in India, and many of you will remember those times. Actually, if we wasted food on the plate, it was almost considered a sin. And decades later, I still feel the same way. But today's generation doesn't do it. And I think if you can actually, as teachers, explain the amount of wastage, whether it's wastage of energy, whether it's wastage of labor. Like, for example, each time I throw half a tomato away, the amount of water that has gone in, the amount of electricity that must have been gone in, the amount of transportation fuel that must have gone in into actually bringing the tomato from the field back onto my plate. People have to really understand that. Young people need to understand that and become sensitive to it, because I think what I feel that today's younger generation is far more conscious of their responsibilities and the environmental impacts of their own lifestyles than previous generations were. So it is like I think Eddie mentioned it. I think it's about people are willing to listen. We have to just be able to answer the questions, show them the right way, guide them the right way, and they will become much more sensitive to it. It's just a question of telling them and basically making them sensitive to the whole notion of responsible consumption. I don't know whether I've answered the question properly, but I think it's just to give an example. Just the fact that we did a calculation just yesterday that the 2 months that we've been practicing alternative working from home, in just one of UNDP's offices in Bangladesh, we have numerous offices, we've saved something like $100,000. Simply because we didn't pay electricity bills, we didn't pay fuel bills for people to commute, and not to mention the huge amount of productivity that has gone up simply because I'm not having to encounter Dhaka's terrible traffic every single day.
Thank you, Sudipta. Ambika, you want to take a counselor perspective on this, and then we will wrap up. We've gone unsustainably over time.
Okay, thanks. Anjali, I think it's two levels. It's the curriculum and the pedagogy. So if you have a school which has environmental studies, where the projects are encouraged, where there's a green club, but for me, it goes beyond that. So again, twofold. One, when you build it into the curriculum, when you're talking about racial injustice in the US in the history class, or a social studies class, or casteism in India, if you're talking about privacy and ethics in your computer science class. So there is that layer of sustainability. You're talking specifically to the consumer-driven sense of entitlement. It affects in two places, in my view. One is the actual climate change aspect, which Eddie is sort of our expert sitting right here. And he sort of shared a point as well, that it is what you're consuming, it is not abstract, it is affecting us, you're seeing it. I mean, the 500 plus million living beings that died in the Australian wildfires was 6 months ago, 7 months ago. I know it feels like 5 years because it has been a wreck of a year, but these are things that are real, and with technology, these are accessible and fairly in your face. The other thing is, I think it starts from the individual. So as a counselor, I have tried to make my room, we used to send in paper transcripts, by the way, up until I joined. So we have gone online, everything is online. Anything I shred, I send to the arts department to be used for paper mache. I don't have a plastic bottle. When I leave my room for a session upstairs in the audiovisual hall, I switch off the lights, I make the kids pick up everything. So it is the way you talk to them about what they're consuming. As an ex-investment banker who occasionally is known to carry bags which a school counselor perhaps shouldn't or shouldn't be able to afford, there are those conversations as well. My room is a safe space, and I think that is where you come in. Like I say, I'm not your teacher, I'm not your mom. I'm here as a sounding board. It's up to you how you want to use that. And there has to be transparency, and there has to be a certain sense of freedom, unbridled freedom, for them to be able to say what they're saying, respectfully, of course. And then I get to say back to them. And as you can tell, I'm becoming increasingly casual in my conversation, but that's how I am with the kids, and it works. It's also about privilege. When somebody is coming in, so there are kids who've got that 2,000 crore business, whatever, $100 million business. And there are students who can't even afford, a second set of uniform to come to school. It is about highlighting those facts in a gentle, non-discriminating way. It is them. These are the little things. And I really think the little things add up. This is a really big topic and we can all go on. So I hope this starts the conversation. But yes, it is consumer driven. There is a feeling of entitlement, and that one value that you can talk about is your privilege and how you're using it. If you have voice, how are you using it? That's from me.
Thank you so much. I want to wrap this up by thanking all the panelists who are here. The world, as we have known, has definitely changed, especially in the last 6 months, and it will continue to disrupt. But that also is where the innovation lies. For those who believe in it and those who don't, the reality is that without sustainable development goals being met, implemented, we will continue to struggle as humankind. Let us take the message to our students, to our families, and have that pledge of solidarity for the fulfillment of all these various goals in sync with each other, not one against the other or one over the other. Thank you so much again, the esteemed panelists who have been able to come, share your insight, your wisdom, your stories. Don't hesitate to reach out to Eddie, to Nima, to Ambika, to Sudipta. with your questions later on, or connect through IC3. Thank you, IC3, for hosting this. All of you, stay safe, wear your mask, stay physically distant, but socially connected. And we wish all of you good health, peace, prosperity. Let us make this planet thrive, and so shall we. With